you, Diana. I'm going to start now. All right, so our problem statement is about reducing redundancies in services and efforts addressing faculty. And we think this is so important for every victim and for every person at risk who has a service duplicated, that is one person who is not receiving that service. That's why we feel this is so important. So basically what we're doing is using existing technologies like GIS and APIs of existing technologies, and using that to map efforts in terms of program efforts and in terms of funding efforts. So basically just piggybacking on what technology is already there to create a GIS, a geographical representation of efforts, both programmatic, both funding programmatic government. And that's basically the idea. And Tim's going to talk a bit more about the impact.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you why what we've come up with is important and useful to you. Like Luke said, there's a lot of redundancy and there's a lot of service repetition in the industry that we're in. And so we want to try and reduce that. Some of the stuff that we've come up with is the ability to reduce the replication of programs in the same area. We've also done the confluence of big data and crowdsourcing, and so that's a new that's a new application of that at least. And we also want to eliminate funding redundancies. So in terms of programmatic reductions in redundancies, what that helps us do is it helps NGOs allocate resources better. How does it do that? Let's go to the map, okay? So over on the map, we see that Siem Reap has got 4 people, Kampong Tom has got 3 people. Go back to the map, please. Okay, there's 4 people there, and there's 4 people there. So, so let's assume that Kampong Tom only had 1 person. Each person represents an NGO. So what we see is that for an activity like outreach, Siem Reap is overrepresented, Kampong Tom is underrepresented, and so given that visual mapping, we would be able to reallocate resources, all of us together, because this platform, this visual way of representing data would be available to everybody. So so that's one of the things. The other thing that we'd be able to do is we'd be able to use big data in collaboration with crowdsourcing. So if you see the big black line from Siem Reap, let's say we plug in big data on migration patterns from the IOM, for example. So that big line represents all the people that travel from Siem Reap to Phnom Penh. From Kampong Tom and from Mondulkiri, there's smaller lines. That means that more people travel from Siem Reap. With this data, what happens is law enforcement officials can concentrate better on Siem Reap and less on Mondulkiri. But here's the great thing about it. With crowdsourcing, if we've got stakeholders on the ground, they will be able to give us on-the-fly data. It's very dynamic data. And that data can do 2 things. Number 1, it can either tell us that what we already know is still correct. And number 2, if, for example, PERSA has got a lot of small data coming up here, then we realize that the trends are changing. And then we can reallocate our resources to focus on PERSA. So that's programmatic. No, okay. And then funding. So sometimes NGOs want to do good work and we invest in programs that already exist. Sometimes funders want to do good work, but they have one perception of what exactly good work is. If we were able to map what areas receive the most funding, so let's say that on this map, the amount of aftercare that received funding was this much, and then the amount of protection work that received funding was this much. Graphically, we can represent that aftercare is overfunded and outreach is underfunded, and then we can tell our funders that actually, we understand that you want to fund aftercare, but actually outreach requires funding. So that helps us reallocate funding resources as well. This is important because it gives us a bird's eye view of everything. Governments and people are able to look at all this macro data and understand the severity of the problem, the extent of the problem. In terms of follow-up, next slide please. Okay, that's not that. In terms of follow-up, we think that there's no point in having a standalone mechanism. So what we want to do is integrate it with Freedom Registry, existing platforms, so that we can leverage on what they've already got. No point having multiple data sources where we can have one integrated data source. The last point is this.
Time's up.
Okay.
Thank you. What was your last point?
I was just going to talk about relevance. The last point is very simple. The model helps us in ways that technology usually doesn't help us in. It helps change behavior of NGOs and funders. It helps increase collaboration between NGOs. It helps reduce redundancies. It better serves the populations that need help. And it saves a lot of money because we reduce redundancies. The best part is that this thing is extremely scalable and very customizable because you can plug in new data and you can make it applicable to Europe. You can change the crowdsourcing mechanism and you can register the needs of the people on the ground, or the available resources. So if I have a jeep in some place and somebody needs a jeep, they have to get from one place to another, you'll be able to use that data. Thank you.
There's all this information coming from us. So I'll answer that question by saying that in terms of program focuses, Jeff and I are working on an initiative to map program focuses. And that's kind of the thing that this would be backpacking. So it's taking existing technology and then adapting, using that and layering it on top of it.
Okay,
So
you're sorry. Thank you.